Hey guys, this is going to be a special podcast that I think you're going to love. But let me just give a introduction really quick before we get into this podcast. I don't often do this, but I'm going to do it for this one, and here's why. This podcast gets heated. And there are some times where we talk over one another in this podcast, in our debate. We disagree strongly. This is a believer that is pretty awesome. I feel that it is a privilege to do the podcast together with him. And I also think it's extremely healthy that we don't agree. You're going to hear both of us become passionate in our debate in defending what it is that we believe. And at the end of this podcast, there was a part where I feel like I'm not able to actually interject or get in there. So I put his mic on mute and I end the podcast without him, unfortunately. However, this brother called me back and we ended up talking for like another hour. He was an absolute delight to talk to, and we actually disagree less than you think. We do have a lot of things that we completely agree on. It's just that there were some key points that he was not happy with, and he was not happy with my answers on, and I love that. So we were able to really tease out a certain subject about the way God blesses nations. I think you're going to love it.
Well, you know what I think. I'm a Christian. I'm not going to deny that.
I do want everyone to feel comfortable, and that's why I'd like to talk to you about Jesus.
Please do not go religious.
Somebody's going to hell over this.
He better not.
Even the devil will speak the truth for his own purposes.
This is war.
Accept it.
Back to Jerusalem podcast.
Yeah, I'm back, and I'm armed with righteousness.
With your host, Eugene Bach.
He just seems like he's got it all figured out.
He's a righteous dude.
Yep.
Hello and welcome to another Back to Jerusalem podcast. I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, and I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of sunny Sweden this time, and I'm super excited about this podcast. We got a special guest that's coming on, joining us, and we're going to be talking about Buddhism today. And I hope that you are able to sit in for this entire podcast for those of you that downloaded it, because I think that this is going to be a really great conversation. Adam, are you there?
Yes, sir.
All right. Hey, it's good to have you on. Thank you so much for making time to join us on the Back to Jerusalem podcast. This is a real pleasure for us.
Awesome. Thanks for, including me in the show and everything, and you guys taking the time to set this all up.
Yeah. Before we get going, I would love just for you to introduce to the audience a little bit about what you feel comfortable sharing about your background and who you are.
Sure. I'm from the U.S. I'm from New York. I'm Christian. I've been Christian my whole life. My education is actually in comparative religion, so I went to school for that and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, that's pretty much all that there really is. I guess that's pertinent to this conversation.
Okay, great. And I know that our team had posted a video specifically about leaving Buddha and Buddhism, a book that I wrote a few years ago together with a dear friend of mine that I work closely together with inside of Tibet. And you had said that you would like to come on and just share some thoughts about Tibetan Buddhism.
I wasn't really 100% just going to share my thoughts on it. I wanted to hear. I want to just discuss with you about it because I myself am not a Tibetan Buddhist. I have studied Tibetan Buddhism quite a bit, so I wanted to hear more or less what your feelings were on Buddhism. And I remember you came to some conclusions that the reason why you believed that India and various other countries in the East, they were in poverty was because of Buddhism.
Yeah, so basically, I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not an expert in Buddhism, but I have been traveling most of my life in Buddhist areas. So I live in China. I've lived in China for the last 20 some odd years, spend quite a bit of my time in Nepal, Tibet, Bhutan, and work with former Buddhist monks that have taught me a lot. So I've actually had an opportunity to sit under Buddhist monks, lamas, and be taught about Buddhism and to study under them. about the foundations of Buddhism, as well as the background of Hinduism, some of the support mechanisms that actually are the background of that religion. So I myself am not an expert, but I'm an observer. And so I have told the stories as it has come from the people that I serve together with. And when it comes to the nations of Nepal, I refer to Tibet as a nation, even though technically it's not. Technically, it's a part of China, but culturally, linguistically, almost in every way, economically, even if you travel there in China, you have to have a separate visa. You can't just get a visa to China and travel to Tibet. You need a separate visa specifically for Tibet in order to travel there. And then, of course, Bhutan as well. So when I travel to these countries, I see a big disparity between Christian nations and Buddhist nations. I see an economic disparity, an educational disparity, and I see when it comes to medical, even leisure time, there's a difference. And I do attribute those because I believe in a spiritual world, and I believe in a physical world, and the two impact each other. And so I think that the two are reflective. There's a spiritual poverty, darkness in Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, Northern India, that I really feel, and those are areas that are specifically Tibetan Buddhism, and some parts to some extent, Inner Mongolia and Mongolia as well, where Tibetan Buddhism is practiced.
Yeah, I understand that you traveled in these areas and you see the poverty there, and you made these correlations that it's the religion and this or whatever. But I mean, have you ever spent any time traveling in other countries and other Christian countries that were also very poor as well?
I have traveled. So basically, the way that I often see it is this way. There's kind of a pinnacle. So if you've ever heard of something that is called the Protestant work ethic. There's actually a Yale University study that you can look up from 2018. Phenomenal study. I spend more than 300 days a year traveling, spend most of my time on the road. I mean, I'm in Europe now. I actually carry more than one passport. So I'm not just a citizen of the US. You can probably hear that from my accent, but I'm also a citizen of other countries as well, specifically European. So I spend quite a bit of my time on the road, moving from country to country. I'm actually in Europe at the moment. But this study is phenomenal, this Protestant work ethic. And it was done by an atheist from Yale University. You can actually look it up. It's a phenomenal study. It was based on an old concept that's called the Protestant work ethic. And it is kind of the age-old question, why is it that Protestant nations specifically do so well when it comes to human rights, when it comes to medical breakthroughs, technical breakthroughs, like all of the different schools that we see, whether academics, whether it's, Yale or if we look at Cambridge, if we look at some of the bigger European universities like in Turin, then we find like certain breakthroughs that we just don't find in Saudi Arabia. We don't find in Sudan. We don't find in India or Nepal or North Korea. And so what they do in this study is they break up an area. This is Yale University. They break up 4 different study groups in the Philippines, which is a Catholic country. And in that study, what they do is they take one area and they just teach the gospel, nothing else, for 1 hour a week for 52 weeks. Then they take another region that is separate and isolated, and they only teach life skills, how to write a resume, how to practice good hygiene, how to better your life through very simple structures that you can add to your home or whatever for sanitation reasons. And then they have a third group, which for 52 weeks, a half an hour on life skills and a half hour of the Protestant gospel. And then they have a fourth group, which is isolated, no changes. That is the study group. That is the group that they use to kind of measure all the other groups.
Right, the control.
The control group, yeah. So, and at the end of that 52 weeks, their findings, I believe, were phenomenal, because I do a lot of humanitarian work with our organization. And some of our humanitarian work is what we would say sanitized, meaning that it doesn't include the gospel in any way, because it might create a problem in the environment that we're working in. So I've seen a benefit of doing just pure humanitarian work and then just pure evangelism, or Christian Protestant evangelism. So my idea was that in that study, the third group 3, or the combination of both the life study or the life works and then also the Protestant gospel together, that would be the most impacted group. And I was completely wrong. It was actually the group that only got the gospel teaching from the Bible that, like, not just did better, but it towered over all the others. It went 17% higher in almost all the different measurable factors that they were looking at as far as bettering life, and to the next one. So it wasn't 17% better than the control group. It was 17% better than the next group under it. I've seen that across the board, where in the top percent, the countries that have kind of the best, the highest life expectancy, the best kind of universities, the best medical provision, all of those things are usually, I will say, Christian Judaic, because the Jews are kind of in there as well. Anybody that's ever traveled to Jerusalem or Israel and Tel Aviv will see that. Underneath that, not as good, but the poverty level comes down a little bit. It's still, but it's still kind of preferable to some of the other options, would be the Catholic countries. And then under that would be the Buddhist Hindu countries. And then under that would be the Muslim countries. And at the very bottom, where the misery index level is the highest, in my opinion anyway, would be the atheist nations. Now, of course, there are nations that do not fit in that. So people can easily point to Saudi Arabia or UAE. They can point to Turkey versus Uganda. But as a general rule, that looks like a kind of pyramid that you can easily create, with Christian Protestant nations being at the top. Do you not agree?
I mean, I guess I can see that there can be correlations, between these things. But if you look up in the world and you look up, like, let's say you just look up what are the poorest, like, countries in the entire world, and you go through and you look up everything, you will notice that most of the poor countries in the world are Christian. I mean, even India. I mean, I would say even the first top 20 countries for the poorest country in the world are either Christian or Muslim. I don't really see India topping that list, or Bhutan topping that list, or Bangladesh topping that list. I mean, like, a lot of Christian nations are very poor. I've traveled all over the world myself, and I have seen outright poverty in Christian nations, even Protestant Christian nations. And even the Protestant work ethic that you're mentioning, it could be more of just a product of that church rather than just a product of just what is coming out of the Bible in general. Because, like you said, you have to separate between Protestant and Catholic and all the other different denominations. So there must be something specific to what is taught in the Protestant church that is different from what is taught in the other denominations of Christianity. So the thing that I'm asking is that from a biblical standpoint, like, what exactly in the Bible would you say is a contributing factor to these nations being so successful? And the ones that are not successful, that are also Protestant and stuff, what is the reason, would you say, that these nations are not successful?
That's a really good question, and I don't disagree that there are a lot of, if we were to look, for instance, at certain impoverished nations. So I don't disagree that there are Christian, or I guess we can call them Christian nations. It depends on what you determine as a Christian nation. For instance, Kenya, many might call that a Christian nation. Nigeria, many might call that a Christian nation. However, within that category, I could probably pick it apart at least a little bit. And say, well, that's not wholly true, because I can go through Kenya and Nigeria and find instances where, like for instance, Nigeria, even though you have the wealthiest area of Nigeria is made up of Christians, the area where the best education is available is Christians. However, a large majority of it is Islam, and the current leader of Nigeria is Muslim. So when we look at each nation, we could go through one-on-one. I won't die on this hill. This is not a theological strong point for me. This is not something that I teach. It's just an observation that I've made. And it's something that I think is a great discussion point that I'm willing to unpack and kind of tease it out a little bit and see how true is that. The Protestant work ethic, by the way, is not my phrase. That is the phrase that was used for the Yale study. I believe it was of 2018.
Why don't other branches of why don't other denominations of Christianity also have the same work ethic? Like, what is the exact reason? Because there are some denominations of Christianity, for instance, that do things that other denominations don't do. Like, take for instance, the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. They're considered to be a blue zone. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's considered to be one of a handful of places in the world where people are living to 100 and higher. They're considered to be one of like the few, I think there's like 5 or 6 places globally that were identified that people were living to these advanced ages, octogenarians and older. But it's because there are specific practices within the Seventh-day Adventists as far as like their diet and things like that that are specific only to that denomination. Like, you wouldn't just see the average Christian living to 100 like how you would see. So what I'm trying to pinpoint is, like, is this a specific teaching that is within just the Protestant denomination, or is this a teaching that is just generally from the Bible? Because, like I said, the Seventh-day Adventist diet is not really truly based on the Bible. It's something that they just decided to really do on their own. And I think that this is something that we need to acknowledge, that these groups can make these modifications to the teachings that, even though they don't necessarily come from the Bible, can still be beneficial. That's really my question. Is that what specifically from the Bible directly, as far as verses that you can point out that you believe are a correlation to the success of a nation, like teachings from the Bible specifically?
Yeah.
Like what Jesus...
Okay, yeah. This is really good. So yeah, I am familiar with the blue zones just because for the last 6 years, I have completely cut all carbs and sugar from my body. So the blue zone is kind of a big study for people that talk about the Mediterranean diet versus the keto diet versus the all these different ways of eating, because we see it in Japan. It has an island that's one of the blue zones. We see it in the Mediterranean. We see it in California, or certain areas that are study groups for California. This is a really good question, because basically my whole life is doing this. If you've ever read any of the writings that I've done, and so I've written quite a number of books, and the majority of the books that I write are biographies. Individuals that have such amazing stories that I want to make sure that those stories don't die out when they do. Like, I want to give them longevity for the stories that they tell. And those stories, none of them are stories of prosperity and following a mantra that will bring them wealth and riches and blessing and long life. In fact, the people that I work with, I spend quite a bit of like I said, I've lived in China for over 20 years. I spend quite a bit of my time living and working in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Spend quite, traveling in North Korea, traveling in Sudan and Somalia and Iran and Iraq. These are not areas where Christians have a very long lifespan. The books that I write are of individuals so the last book that I put out is called Shackled, about one of the heroes that I have, a woman by the name of Miriam Ibrahim. She was Sudanese, and she was sentenced to 100 lashes and death by hanging because she refused to deny the name of Jesus in a country that enforced Islam. And so her... everything that pointed to her having a long, prosperous life was opposite when she accepted Christ. The individuals that I serve together with in China, when they accept Christ, they accept a life of hardship, persecution, and oftentimes their lives are cut short. When we look at the disciples that followed Jesus, 11 out of 12 of them died a premature death. Only John lived to die of an old age, and even he was exiled to the Isle of Patmos. So I want to be very careful here that I don't connect in any way to what might be considered the prosperity gospel, right? I don't know if you're familiar with that, because what I don't want to do is to somehow give this indication that people or societies that adopt the gospel are guaranteed prosperity. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there is something about a generational blessing that comes on to those that make that sacrifice. Individuals that give their life to Christ and says, under no circumstances will I deny him. For me and my house, we have decided to follow the Lord, to trust the Lord. And there's something in the ideas of biblical laws, like the law of gravity, for instance. When, like, if I pick up my phone and I drop it, that is the result. As it falls to the ground, that is not it's this law that kind of is enacted, and we can see it. And it's laws that make life actually pretty good. I'm a pilot. If we didn't have laws, flying would be super scary if they just change every 5 minutes. So one of the beauties about the world that we live in is that we are a society, or a world made up of laws. And I don't believe that there's just natural laws. Perhaps, maybe, I would argue, there are spiritual laws. And in those spiritual laws, we see certain things that are guaranteed. One of those is death, destruction, suffering when we follow the ways of the enemy. When we give in to Satan, when we give in to our own flesh or our own desires, that may feel good in the short term, but it actually hurts us in the long term. I also believe that there are certain laws in the Bible. For instance, whoever blesses Israel will be blessed, and whoever curses Israel will be cursed. This idea of God's people being blessed and God's people being cursed, also reflecting those that help or hinder them, as we can find in Numbers 24, chapter 24. This idea that there is something that is a generational blessing. For instance, God, even though if we look at the life of Abraham, his life, even though he was given a promise, he sacrificed himself. He never actually went into the promised land. He died before he ever got in there. Same with Moses. Before Moses ever went into the promised land, he died before he got there. So these two individuals were given a grand promise that they never saw fulfilled in their lifetime, but they sacrificed believing that the God that they served was bigger than just their lifetime span. And I love the way God speaks generationally in the Old Testament. It says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there's kind of this ripple effect throughout society where, and we see it throughout the Old Testament. So if the Old Testament does anything, in my mind, it paints this roller coaster. We see generation after generation on a roller coaster of a people that is living in slavery, in poverty. Their misery is high, and they call out to God, help us, deliver us. And God delivers them. He blesses them. He puts them on the city on the hill to be a bright light for the world. And on that hill, the next generations begin to deny him. They begin to look into themselves and say, we didn't get here because of the God of the Jews. We got here because of our own hard work, our own efforts. Actually, it was the God of the foreigners that came. We will pray to them. And then you start to see that decline in society where they begin to go back down into their slavery. They become impoverished again. They become miserable again. And then in that misery, the next generation calls out and they go back up. So we see this up and down throughout the generations. And so I do see these as contributing factors and biblical principles for the rise and fall of nations. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I mean, I see that you're making these connections, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that ideologically. It's just the fact that you can't empirically prove that that's true.
You're absolutely right. There are so many factors when we're talking about like trying to measure the factors. So, for instance, right now, I could say this, and a lot of people are saying this. You're in America right now. I'm calling you in America. There's a lot of people that say that our nation is going down the tubes because we need a revival again. We need to call out to God. There's a lot of people that could argue that and say, no, we're going down the tubes because we are subjected to the prices of oil in the Middle East. We have bad policies when it comes to immigration. We have bad trade policies as it relates to China. We have a reform that needs to take place in the political world. We need political reform. That is the reason why we're having a problem. We have taxes that are out of control. We have debt that is, and these are actually measurable things that we can say lead to the fall of a nation. And we can say that, practically this is the real reason. But I still adhere to that all of these are influenced by, and it's okay that you may not agree with this, and it may not be something that we can measure. I mean, how do you measure the spirit of a nation? How do you calculate
Right. That was more like less my argument when I listened to the video, is that you didn't really specifically state that these were just your opinions. There is no empirical data to back up anything that you're claiming, and it's fine for you to have your own beliefs, but you should definitely add in there that these are your opinions. They're not actually based on any empirical facts that you can actually correlate or prove.
No,
and I think that's more than fine for you to believe that, hey, if a Christian nation, if people are Christian, even though their life might be hard, their future generations are going to be good, and maybe you're 100% right, but you can't make these statements as though they're true and you don't really know that they're true. I think it's more than okay for you to state that is your belief and that you're strong about that, and that's more than fine. But you didn't actually. I listened to the original podcast where you were talking about the dark side of Buddhism, and you didn't actually add that caveat in there that, hey, these are just my opinions. There's actually no data to back up anything that I'm saying. So that was the only. I wanted to speak with you about that specifically, because I was like, how were you able to empirically prove that it's because of Christianity why these nations are doing well? That was my main argument that I was trying to get out of you, and you basically just said that you don't have any evidence to back that up. It's just your beliefs, and that's fine.
Yeah, no. I said that you can find other reasons for a country, so you can measure things empirically that would point to other factors that would result in a nation falling, or a nation not being successful, or a nation being impoverished. But when I'm in a dark nation over and over again,
you cannot specifically say that religion is the causation.
I can.
Why this nation's not doing well. Because if you look at Japan, for instance, if you look at all the countries in the world that have contributed to modern technology, America and Japan are considered to be number one and number two. America, by far, is leading the pack when it comes to modern technology, but Japan is right after us, and Japan is not a Christian nation. Most of Japan, as far as I know, is Buddhist and Shinto. And they're a very prosperous nation. They have extremely low crime, in Japan. So it wouldn't really. I mean, could I say that Japan is successful because of Buddhism? I mean, you see what I'm saying? It's like you could just basically cherry pick out the countries that are doing well and say they're doing well because of this religion. But if you really look at it statistically speaking, most of the Christian nations around the world are poor. Even though, look at Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of the poorest countries in the world. They were the second nation after Armenia to convert to a Christian nation. If what you're saying is true, that the generations after them have been successful, Ethiopia has been Christian longer than every country in the world besides Armenia. Why aren't they more successful than everybody else?
I'm so glad that you brought up Japan, because Japan is actually one of the places that I often point to that people like to use as an example that kind of fits outside of that. Like I said, this is a generality, but every single nation that I've traveled to, I continue to see evidence that backs up exactly what I say. And I believe that in Japan, we have something that's different. It is not a Christian nation. Why is it different? Why do we have advancements in Japan, which, by the way, when it comes to advancements technologically, we really are seeing an emergence in South Korea, which points to my example of Christianity. We also see a huge, one of the leading nations, the highest PhDs per capita, as well as one of the most innovative countries in the world is not US or Japan, it's actually Israel. But when we look at Japan, what is different about Japan than the surrounding nations? And I would say this, even though Japan is not a Christian nation, here's the key. They allow the freedom of Christians. That is a big, big difference. Christian missionaries can get visas.
You're saying that Christians don't have freedom in India?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So you are not free to practice Christianity in India?
If you look at the persecution that takes place in India on a regular basis, in fact, we just sent a buttload of support to India for over 200 churches that were burned to the ground 2 weeks ago. Tens of thousands of Christians had to go on the run from being attacked. No, India is not a place that I would say we have Christian freedom. In fact, most Christian organizations that used to operate just 10 years ago, including our own, has been shut down because of this whole banking status that they've set up specifically to target and shut down Christian organizations. We don't have that in Japan. Japan, you can actually...
That's more probably a recent development. Christianity has been in Japan since, the Apostle Thomas?
No. Yeah, so...
How long has Christianity has been in Japan, in India for well over 1,000 years?
Yes, Christianity has been in it, but that's where Thomas died from being persecuted. If you travel to Chennai...
That set up the church over there in India?
So if you go to Chennai, there you will see the place where Thomas was actually executed. And you will find a group of Christians that operate in the South. And where do you find most of the wealth in the South? Where do you find most of the freedom of India in the South? It's where Christians have the most freedom, which is South India. Once you start moving into different areas that are predominantly Hindu, Buddhist, or other religions, what you often find is Christians are not just a little oppressed, severely persecuted. This is something that I'm actually firsthand...
There is a historical documented history of this happening for centuries? Because
yes.
I know that Jews have also been in India for a long time too, and the Jews have said for a long time that they're one of the only countries they've ever been in the entire world where there is no anti-Semitism. I think this is something that we need to understand, is that India is a very religious, tolerant country. It's just that when you are trying to push a gospel on somebody, I think the problem that Indians have with Christians is that you guys tell them that their religion is evil.
No.
You guys tell them that they're worshiping the devil, and if you go up to somebody and you tell them these type of things, you're going to elicit a negative response from those people.
Okay, so when Christians are...
If somebody were to attack you and tell you, hey, your religion is garbage, you're worshiping the devil, you're evil. See, this is the thing, is that Jews are not very well known for proselytizing. They do not go around and try to spread their religion all over and tell other people that their religion is bad, or that they're worshiping the devil, or whatever the case. As long as you are not attacking that person's religion as far as from an ideological standpoint, I don't think that you would have any problems in India. The only two religions that I see that had a problem in India are Christianity and Islam. And both of those religions, if you're aware of that, are very keen on persecuting other religions, telling them that they worship the devil and saying all this negative stuff. If you say these sort of things to people, it is going to elicit a negative response from people. That is very natural.
Anytime you tell anybody they're wrong, anytime you tell anybody they're wrong, you are going to elicit a negative response.
No, I don't really think that's it, because Jews have been living in India for a long time, and they haven't been doing anything to them.
Yeah, no, when you look at Christianity, you say that you're a Christian. If you are a Christian, what is the very first command and the last command that we are given from Christ?
Well, he said that we're supposed to love God and we're supposed to love each other.
That's the top one. That's the number one. To love God and love each other. That is the top one. The very last command that was uttered from the lips of Jesus before he ascended into heaven was to take his message to all the world. Acts 1:8 is known as the Great Commission.
I don't have a problem with taking Christianity all over the world. I have a problem with Christians telling other people that they are devil worshippers. Jesus never said that.
Jesus said, I am the only way. I am the truth and the life. The only way.
Jesus never went, and there's nowhere in the Bible does it say that every other religion that is not revealed in the Bible is revealed by the devil, and that everybody who is not a Christian is a devil worshiper. There is nowhere in the Bible that it actually specifically points these things out.
No, it says very clearly that Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That is an exclusivity.
Like I said,
that is an
exclusivity. Ways in
exclusivity.
which a person can acknowledge this, because you have to understand that Christ is not just in Jesus. Christ is a universal force that is inside of all of mankind. It's what gives everybody life. It says that in John 1:4, that within the Word was light, and that light was the life of all mankind. Anybody who is really interested in trying to understand Christ, even if they don't have a Bible, if they look deeply within themselves, I think that they will wind up finding Christ. I mean, how can you say certainly, without a doubt, that none of these religions ever thought to look up that light inside of themselves to be able to connect with God? I mean, you can look at every religion. You can look at Islam. You can look at Buddhism. You can look at Christianity. All of these religions talk about this light that is inside of us. I mean, how can you be 100% certain that this light that is mentioned is not Christ, that is inside of everyone, that all these religions just keep talking about? I mean, how can you be certain of that?
Because Christ himself said that he is the only way. There's no way to the Father but through him. And if you continue to read John chapter 1, you'll see that John the Baptist...
That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, you'll see very clearly that John the Baptist said...
Hold on, wait, let me finish. If this light is inside of everybody, and they're using this light to be able to connect with God, everybody is connecting with God through that light.
No, that is universalism. That is universalism. That is definitely not what the Bible teaches. If you continue, it's very important that we don't parse out the Bible according to our own beliefs, but instead read it as its collective whole.
What you're doing by you saying that these people are worshiping the devil, you're specifically doing that. You're being hypocritical.
I love how you just said that. I said that the people of India are worshiping the devil. I love how you just said that. At no time did I say that the people of India are worshiping the devil. That sentence never came out of my mouth.
About evil and darkness and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
God is not evil. God is not dark. There's no darkness in God. The Bible, if you're pointing at anything that is dark, or that you're basically pointing at something that is not God. So you're connecting
human sacrifice.
I remember you talked about the different spiritual powers that these different yogis in India would get, and that you talked about how they got these powers from demons. You specifically said that in that audio.
Because when we see these specific demons manifested,
this is you have to really say that from.
Because when we look at demon-possessed individuals in the New Testament,
but Christ is an internal phenomenon. It's not just isolated to that man. It is in something that is within everybody in the entire world. Galatians says that. It's all over in the Bible.
No, wait a minute. You said John 1:4. You said John 1:4. Let's look at John 1:4. You said John 1:4. Let's look at John 1:4. It says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of all mankind." It doesn't say the light was in all mankind. It said it was the light of all mankind. The light shines in where? The darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He became as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. So that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He himself was not the light. Who? John. John was not the light. He came only as a witness to what? The light. So,
No, I'm not saying that these people are saying that they're the light. I'm saying that this person may have access to these things through their own light, because it's this light that gives us life. So, and there's other parts in the Bible where they talk about how the soul is it's filled with light, that it's a lamp of God, and whatever the case is. So, the Bible is pointing out that there is light that is. So, you're basically saying the Bible says that Christ is in everybody. It specifically says that.
Where?
Hold on one second. Let me get the verse. I think it's in Galatians. All right. Yeah, Christ is all, and all in Christ.
Galatians what?
So it's basically saying that Christ is in everybody.
Galatians what?
No, it's Galatians 3:11.
Colossians?
Yeah, Colossians. I'm sorry, I was mispronouncing that.
Yep. Colossians 3:11.
Yes.
It's important that we look at this together because this is really, really important.
It says, here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, I think it's Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all.
For
it says that right there.
For what?
It's in Galatians 3:11. It says it right there.
Yeah, but who's
Christ, that said Christ is all and is in all.
Who is it? We have to look at this in the entirety. Who is he speaking to?
Well, if you say it doesn't matter who he's speaking to, if you say all, that means everything, everyone.
No, this is.
I could be speaking to you. I could be speaking to it. But if you say, oh, Christ is in this whole group that's sitting right here, that would not constitute as all.
Okay, all right. Let's take your premise as the right one. The very next verse then gives you a big problem. You want to read it? Verse 12.
Sure, go ahead and read it.
Therefore, as God's chosen people.
Okay.
So now we actually have people that have somehow been set apart. People that is not in all. So the very next portion here contradicts what your belief is. So therefore your belief must be at least a little bit skewed with the interpretation that Christ is in all. Are we all sustained? Are we all sustained?
The life, the force that provides life for every human being, it's not in them, so nobody has any life in them?
No, but this is different. If you're talking about life...
No. I want, because Christ is considered to be the life that is in all of mankind. So there's no life inside of you, so you're dead on the inside? And so everybody who's not Christian is not alive, technically.
That's right. Everybody that does not have Christ inside of them is dead. They are revived and born again. That is why we must be born again.
Is the light of all mankind. It doesn't say all Christians.
No. That's right. He is the light of all mankind. This we agree on. Can we say that? Christ is the light of all mankind. Okay, this we agree on. Now, where do we disagree? That Christ lives in all of us. The light of Christ is in all of us. That we don't agree. The fact that we have life is, I believe, a testimony that God sustains us all, but that doesn't mean that we are all in Christ or Christ is all in us. To have Christ in us is what we do when we confess our sins and ask him to live in our lives and become his disciples. We are crucifying the flesh, as Paul says in the book of Romans. We pick up our cross and we follow after him and we become his disciples. That is what makes us Christians. That's what when we receive eternal life, are accepted into the family of God and become a part of his body. We are not a part of his body just because we're born. We're not born into salvation. We have to accept salvation. There's a freedom there. And one of the things that I think, getting back to your original challenge, I think with me saying that, these certain areas have darkness and therefore that's why we see poverty. I really see a high misery level of the people when I'm in Buddhist areas of Tibet. And it's not just, I'm looking at it with a certain eye. I feel that poverty. I see it all around. And there's an escapism where people are dying to get out of those regions because of the level of poverty that they live in. From the water that they drink, to the houses that they live in, to the medical care that they get, to the type of education or the type that they can't provide for their children. Like in every single instance, you see a people that is stricken, I believe, in being held down by their religion. Now, do I start off my conversations with anybody and say that their religion is evil? Absolutely not. Never. Never, never, never. I come in with the love of Christ and only the love of Christ and share about how he loves them, not how evil they are, how bad they are. I believe that there's only one way to the kingdom of heaven, and that is through Jesus Christ. And that is the word that we teach. And we see huge benefits in people's lives when they accept Christ and begin to follow him.
Yeah, I mean, I 100%, I 100% believe that. You know that there are benefits that can come from a person practicing Christianity. I myself am Christian, so I wouldn't argue with that point. It's just that I don't think that like people will take these things as, oh, Jesus said, I am the truth, the way, and the life. Nobody gets to the Father through me. People will use this as in a fundamentalist type of way to try to marginalize every other religion. And I personally, this is just my personal take on it. I don't think that that's what Jesus was saying. I think Jesus was saying that there's light inside of everybody. In Proverbs 20:27, it says that the human spirit is basically that there's a light inside of the human spirit. You know what I mean? And this light is from God. So the Bible is saying that this light is inside of our soul. It's inside of us. So for you to sit there and say that this light isn't inside of everybody, I don't really think that that's accurate.
Okay, so would you say that there are other ways to heaven?
That this light that's in the soul is only in the souls of Christians?
Okay, so let's get down to where we disagree. Let's get down to where we disagree maybe then. So would you say, is it your belief then that you can get to heaven without Christ?
No, it is my belief that Christ is a universal force, that anybody, regardless of what they may call Christ or how they may understand Christ, every culture is going to have a different way in which they understand the same phenomenon. It's no culture is going to use the exact same words because the languages are different or whatever. No, I do not personally believe that a person is able to get to God without Christ. And I also believe, let's say somebody is living in the North Pole and they have no access to a Bible, I honestly believe that that person will also be able to get to God if they focus on that light that is inside of their soul. I think that it's possible even without a Bible, because what is God going to do? Send you to hell because you don't have a Bible? There has to be some way that somebody can tap into that light, whether or not that they have a book. And I think that light is showing you what's right, what's wrong. This is the right thing to do. This is not the right thing to do. That's the truth aspect of it. The truth, the light, and the way. The light is kind of like showing you the way. Hey, this is the way to God. The truth is, this is what's right. This is what's wrong. These things are, in my mind, are inside of your soul, and this light is guiding you to God. So whether you might want to call it Christ, or you might want to call it in Buddhist terminology, the luminous mind, or whatever it is you might want to call it, I do think that there are other cultures that is possible that they have Christ in their religion. I cannot say for sure if they do or they don't, but I cannot sit there and say they don't have Christ. I don't know that. I don't really know that.
Okay, so the reason why Christians are persecuted in India is because they call the Indians evil, or they believe that the gods that the Indians follow are evil. If the Christians didn't do that, then you believe that the Indians would not persecute the Christians.
I don't know for certain if they wouldn't persecute them. I think that there was a greater likelihood that they would not be harassing them if they were not telling them that, hey, your religion's bad, you're this, you're that, you're worshiping the devil, all that. I mean, you're going to get people angry when you say things like that.
Okay, fair enough. So when Paul went to Athens, I was in Athens last week, and I was there at Mars Hill where Paul preached at Mars Hill, and I stood on the very place where he preached. When he stood in front of the elders of the Athenians and preached his message on Mars Hill, do you think that his message was well received because he was not being inclusive? Or do you think that he should have been more inclusive? Do you think that they accepted him because he was preaching? Athens, the Athenians were known for having every single god that had ever really been introduced to the known world. That was something they took pride in. Their streets were lined with idols, and they had altars from every single god. In their mind, maybe Jesus was just one more god. Do you think that they accepted him?
It's possible. I mean, I didn't live there, and I didn't live at the time that Paul lived.
No, but the book of Acts actually tells us quite clearly the reception that he got. In Ephesians, he was thrown in jail. In Athens, he was chased out. In Rome, he was actually beheaded. And all of these are polytheist countries Paul didn't go in and say, you guys can stay just the same. Jesus actually lives in all of you, and maybe your way is the right way as well.
I think that it's possible that there's a difference. It's because Buddhism actually isn't a polytheistic religion. It's not a religion that teaches idol worship.
What? Have you been to a Buddhist country?
No, I have not, but a lot of people will see these things, and they will see these Buddhist yidams and these various different Buddhist deities and things, and they think that these things are like actual gods that are like exist out there somewhere, and they believe in them, and that's really not how Buddhists understand Buddhas. Various different Buddhas are actually aspects of your own consciousness. They are archetypes, essentially. They are not deities that have their own existential existence.
No,
and
it depends.
You and have
Okay,
influence over you,
so there is a difference,
or send you to hell or something like that. That's not what the whole point of these Buddhist deities is for you to become that deity, not for you to worship that deity. There's a difference.
That's completely wrong.
Let's say a person were worshiping Avalokitesvara, for instance, which is the Buddhist deity of compassion. By you practicing and meditating on that deity, you yourself would take on those compassionate aspects within yourself. The whole point is for you to become Avalokitesvara. For you, in any of these pagan religions, you will see there is a huge difference. Zeus is an actual person that is out there, that is sitting on top of Mount Olympus. He's some guy out there. He's not in here inside of you as a part of you. He's a guy out there, meaning he's an object. That is what would make him an idol. If whatever it is you're worshiping is a part of you, then you know what I mean. It would be difficult for you to say that is some sort of idol. You know, that I don't. This is the thing, is that when you're a Western person and you're looking inside these religions, you're not looking at it through a clear lens. You're interpreting it through the lens that you want to interpret it in. So when you see these Buddhist deities, you see the medicine Buddha, you see all these things, you assume that they're idols. That's what you assume, but they're not idols. They are ideals. There is a difference.
Or we could be interpreting them, or if we would like to see them.
If you get cut or injured, we all have the ability to be able to heal. In Tibetan Buddhism, that ability for you to be able to heal yourself is called the medicine Buddha. That energy is inside of everybody. So if you chant certain mantras or do certain prayers, you can enhance that healing capacity within yourself. That is basically what you're not. These deities are not something that is outside of you. They're something that is already a part of who you are. And then, like in the Bible, it says, "Ye are gods, sons and daughters of the Most High." That's what these things are in my mind pointing at. At least it could be looked at that way.
It sounds nice what you're saying, but it's completely wrong and false. When I go and I spend time in the different monasteries and temples in Tibet and Bhutan, I see a lot of gods and demons that are not something that you can become, but deities actually that you have to pray to, you have to give honor to. So, for instance, with the Tenzin, the brother that I wrote the book about, Leaving Buddha, when I first went to his house, there is this monkey at the top, and it's a very stark image of a man-sized monkey. He has an evil, angry, red face. He's holding a sword, and he's got a white woman that is on her knees, and she's believed to be a witch, and he has slit her throat, and blood is gushing from the sides of her mouth and pouring down her neck. And the monkey is peering over her shoulder, showing his jagged teeth. That is the belief of the monkey, where the Tibetan people believe that they came from, which is the monkey god Fa, as well as the woman demon.
Okay. You're mixing up folk religion.
No. This is
the doctrine doesn't say that people come from these monkeys.
Yes.
Where in the Buddhist?
What are you? This is the essence of Tibetan Buddhism, and if you don't know that, it's very difficult for us to have a real conversation, because Tara.
No, I'm talking about Buddhism as a doctrine, not as a local, folk religion. I want to know where in the Buddhist doctrine does it specifically state? Because if these people have grafted teachings onto Buddhism, then that is their fault. Did the Buddha ever teach anything about this monkey with the teeth and him cutting the witch's throat open? Because that's not in any of the sutras or any of the canons that I've ever read. You got to separate just like there are people who are Christian.
No.
Like, let's say
because what you're saying is true. true if it was a remote village, but this is a Lama that was taught under the Dalai Lama. This is a Lama that is one of the top individuals. And when you look at Buddhism, whether it is
into their own,
you can create the Buddhist world that you would like to, but at the end of the day, Lhasa is the Vatican.
Buddhists as people versus Buddhism
you
as
cannot
a doctrine.
separate. You cannot separate Catholicism from the Vatican.
And like I said,
or
you can go to countries in
from
Africa where you will see that it's very common for them to still practice like Yoruba and other type of native religions that have been grafted onto Christianity. Like they're practicing witchcraft and Santeria and all these other things. And imagine me talking about Santeria and then me blaming that on Christianity. That's not what Christianity teaches.
Yeah,
Just
what's the
because
difference?
It's a common folk practice or a belief does not mean that it is doctrine.
It's a very pretty picture that you're painting, but what's the difference? The difference is
that it's not doctrine.
It is doctrine because just like you can't separate, you cannot separate Islam from Mecca.
These are just myths. These are just beliefs. It's not like these people, if you don't personally believe that you come from this monkey, you can't attain enlightenment. It's not a necessary belief for the attainment of enlightenment. It's more like a folk belief.
So like you cannot separate Catholicism from the Pope.
Area, but we're talking about Buddhism. We're not talking about Buddhists. I think you keep confusing the two. You keep trying to conflate them as though they are the same thing. A Buddhist and Buddhism is not the same thing. The Buddha never taught anything about you coming from monkeys or you doing anything. This is a local belief system that is not in everywhere around the world.
The problem with what you're saying
around the world.
The problem with what you're saying is it's completely ignorant of how Buddhism works, with Lhasa Tibet being the pinnacle and the Dalai Lama being the primary leader for Buddhism. This is Tibetan Buddhism.
I've met quite a few Buddhists who don't like the Dalai Lama.
I've met Catholics that don't like the Pope, but that doesn't make them separate.
They don't like any of these different people. I mean, you cannot try to say everyone believes these things, every Buddhist believes these things. It's not absolutely necessary. These are Tibetan people that have their own local Tibetan beliefs about the origins of their species, and even if these things were the origins of their species, that doesn't really have much to do with the Buddhist as a doctrine as itself.
Yes, it actually does. It actually does, because
believe that you come from these monkeys in order to be able to attain enlightenment. Is that what these monks teach?
What is essential and what you are trying to subtract is the fact that they do have idols. It does branch from Hinduism, and Hinduism is greatly integrated into Buddhism, and there are deities. There are deities within Buddhism that people do pray to. They don't pray so that they can somehow reach that deity, because they have demons and they have hell and they have different levels of heaven that they have to attain or get into as a part of the stages in between reincarnation. Anybody that has been to Bhutan will see an entire nation worshiping or participating in Buddhism in a way that is actually very, in our culture, would be considered to be rape, where they follow after one of the top monks that have taught, because most of Buddhism is not written. It is taught from Lama to monk to follower. We have Drukpa Kunli. If you go and look at, I've traveled all around both Western Tibet as well as in Bhutan, where you find these massive penises everywhere, where the people that pray to that god actually give up certain things that involve rape as well as liquor to this deity or this enlightened one to become more enlightened. This is not just one village.
Is that where is this taught specifically in the Buddhist canon that you are to do these things? Like, did the Buddha do them? You know what I mean? Like, my question is, if you're going to be a Buddhist, the person you should be looking at for these teachings should be the Buddha himself. Did he actually do any of these things?
Yeah, so let's look at the Buddha himself. When we look at the Buddha himself, where did the Buddha come from? Where did Gautama Siddhartha come from?
Nepal. Yeah.
He came from the kingdom of Nepal, which is a part of India at the time, and he was brought up as a Hindu. And as a Hindu, he integrated many of the teachings to his disciples about Hinduism. And his writings were not written like Jesus, which was within like a decade or a couple decades after the death of Jesus. They were actually written centuries later after the death of Buddha. And the main writings that we have today that were integrated into the Asian culture were actually translated by Christian missionaries in China, in Japan, in Korea. And many of those writings that were written came years after, and they had the very basic teachings. But any lama, any monk that follows after Buddha, they read all of the different canons that are a part of the religion, and they teach these things. That's why when I walk into a lama's house and he has this monkey guide of Fa up on his wall, it means something. It's not just something that he wants to pray to and be a part of. It's something that is a part of his history and a part of his theology. Same thing, if I go into any temple in Tibet, it is a demon after demon after demon and lama after lama after lama showing the different levels of heaven, earth, and hell. These are not just things that I pray because I want to feel better. These are concepts that we might find in Japan, we might find in Thailand, we might find in New York City or London, but we don't find in the heart of Tibet.
Okay, I mean, I think that's fair enough, but, like, even if you go to certain churches, whatever the case is, they have, like, gargoyles on the churches, and I remember when I was traveling in Europe when I was a kid, I remember seeing a lot of the gargoyles and paintings and being scared of them and being like, oh my God, like, what is that? What's that statue, that gargoyle over there? You know what I mean, or whatever. So are we to assume because churches had gargoyles on them or things that are scary that Christians worship them? Let's say I wasn't Christian and I was visiting a Christian nation. I go to the churches and I see these gargoyles and I come to the conclusion, oh, Christians worship gargoyles. I mean, like, that's not really an accurate interpretation of what's going on there.
The comparison, though, is different when you have teachers that are actually teaching about these demons. When you have goddesses and gods that are a part of Hinduism being taught in Buddhism.
To worship these demons is the question.
Or if you're fearing it, oftentimes you are doing things to appease those demons.
Okay, so are they worshiping these demons in any way, or because you didn't quite give me a clear answer, yes or no?
So
you're saying by them being afraid of demons that they're worshiping demons. I mean, I'm afraid of snakes. I mean, does that mean I worship snakes?
Yeah, that's okay. That's fair enough. Let me look at if I look at Drukpa Kunli, which I was talking about, he was a Tibetan Buddhist missionary from Tibet, came from the Tibetan Buddhist religion, and he's the one that set up Buddhism for all of Bhutan. They all follow, it's an entire nation that follows after the same authority as Tibet does. He is called the Buddha of 5,000 women. And he teaches that if you want to reach enlightenment, then you have to do it through his penis. And so you have to dedicate a daughter or a wife or some female to reach sexual enlightenment through him. You can look it up. It's Drukpa Kunli. And if you travel to Bhutan, everywhere you travel, you'll see a big penis everywhere.
Your daughter to Drukpa Kunli, what exactly is happening to them?
That they are getting enlightenment, and enlightenment is the closer that you can get to being.
No, that you mentioned rape. Like, who's raping them?
The Buddha.
The Buddha has been dead for thousands of years.
Not thousands of years.
Physically materializes and rapes them?
Yes. So you have now you have.
Wait. You're saying an actual supernatural being appears and rapes the woman in front of everybody?
No. Who's the Dalai Lama?
No. I want to get this clear.
I'm clarifying it for you.
You just said a supernatural being materializes out of thin air and rapes a woman?
That's what I said. I didn't say that. So let's be very careful about what's being said. Let's be very careful about the words that we use, okay? So Drukpa Kunli, who is a Tibetan missionary that set up Buddhism for.
I want to hear.
And I'm telling you.
How are they physically
I am
being
telling
raped?
you.
I want to hear. Are the monks acting like they're Drukpa Kunli and raping the girl? It's like, how is the act happening?
Yes. So those that follow in this lineage help with the dedication of daughters and people that want to reach enlightenment by going and seeking from those that are reincarnations of the Drukpa Kunli. That's how Buddhism works with the reincarnation. Just as the Dalai Lama is not the original Dalai Lama. He's a reincarnation and plans to reincarnate after he dies. The Drukpa Kunli continues to reincarnate in Bhutan, and therefore offerings are given for him. Is every woman that's being offered to him being raped? No. Is this a regular practice that's happening all the time? No. But having sex with the reincarnation is a way to enlightenment. And that is a part of the practice. Now, that is something that you can say, well, that's not worshiping a god or it's not worshiping a demon. But whatever the hell it is, it doesn't look pretty.
Okay, I mean, I'll agree with you, and I think that what we're really conflating is that I'm talking about Buddhism as an actual doctrine itself, like the actual teachings of Buddhism, and I think that you're talking about local traditions is what you're talking about, how local traditions have adapted Buddhism into their local culture, and they developed all these little beliefs and things that are more local that don't really have anything to do. I mean, you can go around the world and you can find all sorts of weird ways in which people practice Christianity. All sorts of, I mean, including like doing magic and doing voodoo and all that sort of stuff. Like I said, Santeria in like Puerto Rico and in Central America or whatever the case is. Santeria is a very, and they will have images of the Virgin Mary, and they're offering things to her, cutting chickens' throats, doing all that sort of stuff. Is that really like Christianity's fault that these people have grafted these things onto this belief system? So that's Jesus. So because these people are sacrificing chickens and doing whatever it is that they're doing, you're saying that these people, that this is the fault of Christianity as a doctrine.
Is the heart of Christianity practicing that?
No, and neither is the heart of Buddhism. I mean, you can find specific, like you said, isolated villages that do this, but as Buddhists in general, are they all doing this?
Well, this is the reason why. Okay, because when I could talk about the killing of people by the Burmese Buddhists. I could talk about the practice of the Chinese Buddhists. I could talk about the practice I could talk about the Marihana. I could talk about the Theravada Buddhists. Why am I clinging to Tibetan Buddhism? Why am I clinging to?
Because the video was called "The Dark Secret of Buddhism," not the dark secret of Buddhists. I'm talking about Buddhism as a doctrine. That's what I'm discussing with you. I don't care about what these local people, what they've done to modify the religion or whatever the case. I'm saying as an actual doctrine. Does the Buddha teach idol worship? Does he teach any of these sort of things? Not that I'm aware of.
Why do I stick with Theravada? Or why do I not stick with Theravada Buddhism or another school of Buddhism? Why do I specifically go to Tibetan Buddhism?
Well, I believe it's because you think that you see these things in Tibetan Buddhism and you see all of these different meditational deities and you look at them as though they're idols. And I think that's why you focus a lot of your attention on this. And even then, you spoke about Buddhism in general. You didn't say the dark secrets of Vajrayana Buddhism or even Vajrayana. You just said Buddhism in general, which would have to include Theravada. It would have to include Mahayana, not just Vajrayana. You need to be more specific in the things that you say. You say things with these broad strokes, and a lot of times they're not accurate. But like you make correlations with things that you cannot prove, like, oh, generations after they've been practicing Christianity, the nation's going to prosper. It didn't happen in Ethiopia. They've been practicing Christianity for well over 1,000 years, and they're broke and poor over there. So, like I said, there are times that these are your own personal understanding of these things. They're not like, but you cannot refer to me in a scripture, in a canon that says, hey, you need to let this guy rape you in order for you to attain enlightenment. I never read any of those things in any of the Buddhist books. These are local traditions. They're no different than people who graft on local African religions onto Christianity or even onto Islam or whatever the case is. This is a very common thing you will see around the world where people integrate folk religions into their doctrine. That's not the fault of the doctrine. That's those people doing that.
Tibetan Buddhism is the heart of all Buddhists. Tibetan Buddhism is the heart of all Buddhists. No, now wait a minute. You've talked. I've let you talk. Now I would appreciate the same respect. Tibetan Buddhism is the heart of all Buddhism. All other Buddhism falls further way down the street. Yes, it is. That is the reason why the Dalai Lama is universally respected as the representative of...
actually a minority group of Buddhists. So what you're saying is most Theravada do not even believe in Vajrayana Buddhism. They do not believe in any of the sutras, the scriptures. They don't believe in Padmasambhava. They don't believe in any of these things. So what you just said is inaccurate.
It is absolutely accurate. This is one of the reasons why the Dalai Lama is almost universally revered as the main representative for all Buddhists. And even those that disagree, no, wait a minute. I have let you speak. Now I get to speak. Now I get to speak.
No, let's stop the conjecture.
No, there's not.
Look it up online, and why don't we verify with Google and see what percentage of Buddhists are actually Tibetan Buddhists?
The Tibetan Buddhist is the focus of the stream. And that is the main representation of all Buddhism. That's why the Dalai Lama is so well respected. All Tibetans revere themselves as the heart and the carrier of Buddhism.
Okay, let's look at these numbers. 56% of Buddhists are Mahayana. 38% are Theravada. 6% are Vajrayana. You are absolutely wrong in what it is that you're saying.
No,
most Buddhists are not Vajrayana Buddhist practitioners. That is a minority group of people.
No, what you are talking about is a form of Buddhism, but they all revere the Dalai Lama. Regardless of what school that they go to, they absolutely do. They absolutely do.
Who told me that they do not believe in anything that they don't believe in any of the things that they teach. They believe that all of their scriptures from Padmasambhava are false. They don't believe in any of this stuff. I have never heard any Theravada monk say that he believes in the Dalai Lama. That is absolute. Where are you getting this information from?
Well, the problem that you have is that you haven't actually met with a lot of these people in the countries in which they live and serve and pray. I have. I spend quite a bit of my time together with them inside of the monasteries, listening to their teachings, not talking, but listening. The other thing that you pointed out that I do want to jump on really quick because it is absolutely wrong is the fact that Ethiopia is so poor, even though they've been Christians for generations. A big part of Ethiopia was taken over and attacked by Muslims. They are Orthodox, so it's not like they are Protestant Christians. They are Orthodox Christians. Many of them had to flee from the attacks of Muslims. And even today, even though they're not the most wealthy country, I would much rather be in Addis Ababa than to be in Sudan or Somalia or some of the nations that are around it where the refugees, when they flee from those nations, go to Ethiopia. So even though Ethiopia may not be, Georgia or the east coast of the United States, it's still a lot better than some of the nations that are surrounding it. It's not a Protestant nation. It's an Orthodox Ethiopian nation, which has different practices. And so in many ways, they're a little bit like Catholicism.
This is what I'm getting from you is that you're not using your terminology correctly on a lot of these things. So when you say Christian, you're not speaking about Christianity in general. You're speaking of just the Protestant faith is what you're talking about. Is that correct?
I would say that Protestantism comes closer than Catholicism when we're looking at the Protestant work ethic. That's why I specifically pointed to the Yale study when we first started.
What from the Protestant work ethic comes directly from the Bible as far as like verses and things like that?
We have a lot of things that actually attribute to it. And one of those ideas is the belief that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This idea that Jesus is the Word of God already starts an element that I think is absolutely essential to Protestant Christianity, which is you have the freedom to share and speak and think. This idea that the Word of God can just be released. And even if you don't understand it, the truth will always win. That you might think of a lie, or you might believe a lie, or you might preach a lie, but if you allow the truth in, the truth will eventually win. The problem comes when those that have the lie want to protect the lie, so they persecute those with the truth. And when you persecute those with the truth, you miss out on so much. Protestants aren't really afraid of letting people share their different faiths or different religions. That's why so many people from Muslims and atheists and Buddhists and Hindus, when they are escaping persecution, they often go to Protestant Christian countries. So for instance, when the people were fleeing from Iraq and Syria from ISIS, they made their way not to Turkey, which was a neighboring Muslim country that they could have easily found economic freedom in and stayed there, but they still risked their lives and their children's lives to make their way over to Europe. They could have also gone to UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. Those places are swimming in money. They could have easily gone there, speak the same language, Arabic, have the same religion, similar foods, similar culture, at least a lot closer than Protestant nations, but they didn't go there. They risk their lives and the risk of their children's lives to go to.
All over the place.
I actually proved my point.
From the Bible, what verses from the Bible specifically do you believe that are contributing to the prosperity of these nations? Like what teaching specifically from the Bible? I understand that you say there's a Protestant work ethic, but they could have created this work ethic just on their own. Just like the Seventh-day Adventists created their own diet. The diet that the Seventh-day Adventists follow is not based on the Bible.
Okay.
Their own thing that they decided to create on their own. You know what I mean? It might be influenced, by the Bible, but you cannot say that being a vegan is something that they took out the Bible. That wouldn't actually be accurate. So I think that what I'm trying to get at is that from a doctrinal standpoint, not what these Protestants developed as far as their work ethic, I understand that. What specifically from the Bible can you point out that is going to make the nation successful?
Like when it comes to their beliefs in the Word giving freedom, when it comes to the idea that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom.
These things, that prosperity is going to come, or that because you believe in these things, you believe in these things. But in my mind, I think you're creating your own belief system because the Bible never actually directly says that. If you want to believe that being Christian can lead you to wealth, that's your own personal ideology. The Bible does not actually say that.
No, I never said. Actually, I said that those that choose to follow.
You invented own ideology. This is not from the Bible. So for you to sit there and say that these are Christian, it's not Christian. This is your own ideology. The apostles
but the proof is there.
Everything that they had.
Yep, but the proof is there.
Jesus. They were essentially they were pretty much like how.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning of what I said, Adam. Every single book that I've ever written has talked about individuals that give up everything that they have. Every book that I've ever written talks about sacrifice.
What from a doctrinal standpoint is going to lead somebody to say, hey, if you follow these teachings from the Bible, you are going to be wealthy?
There is no teaching from the Bible that says if you follow these teachings, you'll be wealthy.
Okay, well then, exactly. You're making you're trying to make a correlation that you cannot prove. Essentially,
no, I can't. The reason why is that it's not just an accident. It's not just a coincidence. There are so many nations that we see where the generations are blessed because of decisions that were made by the forefathers. And the decisions of me and my house, we will follow the Lord. And this idea where we see freedom, we see human rights
Eugene,
respected.
You're not answering my question.
I am.
You keep running in circles over and over again.
Yes.
What from a doctrinal standpoint, because if you believe that it causes wealth, then that is your own belief system that you invented. It is not Christianity. That is your own belief system you made up. That's not Christianity. If Jesus didn't teach it, it's your teaching. It's Eugenism. It's not Christianity.
Okay, if that is okay. Let's back up. Is that your main problem? Is that your main problem here? Your main problem is that
you are teaching these things.
Your main problem here is that I believe that nations are blessed because they follow God. That's your main problem?
No. It's that you are saying that those nations are cursed because they do not follow God. Because they do not follow your specific religion. That is your claim, and you are unable to substantiate that.
I am able to. What are you talking about? I can't substantiate it. I can point to them one by one and show the misery index level off the charts when they do not follow Christ.
Yes, but correlate correlation is not causation. Can you say that their suffering is caused by Buddhism?
Okay, all right, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
Like I said, you
let me
go all over the world. There are
correlation is not causation. That is your argument. Okay, let's look at some studies.
My mother's from Trinidad and Tobago. My mother grew up dirt poor. She grew up with nothing. She was sharing a toothbrush with her brothers when she was growing up. And they have been Christian for hundreds of years over in Trinidad, and they are dirt poor over there. Violence it is crazy. Yes, you go to Nepal and people are living in poverty, but our people walk around with AK-47s and machetes cutting and killing people, like over in Mexico and all that sort of stuff. This is absolutely ludicrous that you would think that poverty is the same as these people living in these violent nations. I mean, you go to Africa, there's this violence all over the place. They're just killing people in the droves. Are they doing these things really in Bhutan? Are they out there with the AK-47 just blasting up a bunch of people in Bhutan?
There are people that are being killed by the government if they try to preach the gospel. Here's a study for you. Here's a study for you. Here's the evidence for you. If we look at nations that allow Christians freedom and nations that do not, it's very, very easy to do this study. We can look at East Germany and West Germany. Put a wall in one nation, one nation that speaks the same language, has the same history, has the same geographical location. Put a wall in between them. One side persecute the Christians, one side give the Christians freedom, and see what happens in a couple of years. We actually saw the difference between East Germany and West Germany, but that's Germany. Let's look at another example. Let's look at a much more homogenized region of the Korean Peninsula. Take the Korean Peninsula, divide it in two at the 38th parallel. On the north, do not give the Christians any freedom at all, persecute them, and try to eradicate it completely. On the south, give it people complete freedom to praise God as they wish, and see which nation actually does better. The evidence is there over and over and over. You can say, well, it's correlation, not causation, but we continue to see it, and we see it in the Bible as well. We see it throughout the history of the Old Testament, where the Jewish people, when they follow after God, there is a blessing that hits the generations. When they turn their back on God, we see that their nation goes down in flames every single time. That's why I said that we see this up and down, up and down. Is this a theology that I peg salvation on? No way. I don't talk about it at all. Why do I preach this? Why do I talk about it? Why do I share about it? Because it's an essential element of bringing the gospel into dark regions of the world, like Afghanistan, Iran, India, Tibet, Bhutan, Nepal. It is an absolute belief that not bringing the gospel is not just bringing eternal life in this here and now, but it is something that when people receive the goodness of Jesus Christ, it blesses them, not in the life to come, but in the life that they have now. Will they lose everything? Probably in the first generation, but the sacrifice that they make today can echo in eternity with the generations. Their children can be blessed and their children's children can be blessed. We see it over and over again.
Get that, but as I pointed out, there are nations that have been Christians that for hundreds of years. And some of them are still, most of them are still in poverty. So where are all of these, where's all the riches? Where's all that coming from?
Well, when we're looking at different nations.
What is the reason why these Christian nations that have been Christian for hundreds of years, where's their prosperity? Why aren't they wealthy?
They're the exception, not the rule. You have to look into each nation and.
Not really true. If I pick, so you're saying that most Christian nations in the world are wealthy and there's only a few poor ones? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I said.
You said that there are exceptions, okay? Lots of Christian nations have been Christian for generations, and they're still poor. You said those are the exceptions, right? So you're saying that since they are the minority, you're saying that the rest of them are doing good, and there are a small minority group of people who have been Christian for generations and they're doing bad. That most of the other ones that they're doing good. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying that when we see a nation follow after God, truly follow after God, we see the echoes bless their generations. We don't only see it in nations, we see it in families.
Like I said, let's pick the top 10 poorest countries in the world. Virtually all of them are Muslim and Christian.
Yeah, when I travel to Bhutan, for instance, people will say that it's a wealthier country. It's not. When I travel to Saudi Arabia, because they have so much money in oil,
No, I'm not going off what people say. I'm going off the actual GDP of the country, how much each person makes as far as their cost of living or whatever. I'm not going off hearsay. I'm going off of government information, statistics, like all that sort of stuff. There are many, I would say most Christian nations are living in, a lot of them are living in poverty. A lot of them. But you go to Central America, Nicaragua, Mexico, Panama, all these areas, the Caribbean, they're mostly Christian out there. The Caribbean is outright poor. They have nothing over there. They are struggling, and not only that, they're killing each other in the droves. Is that happening in Bhutan? Because my family is from Trinidad, and I would never go and visit Trinidad without going to my cousins first. I would never walk around Trinidad by myself, because it is extremely dangerous over there.
Okay.
Same thing in Mexico. I lived in San Diego for 7 years. I never went down to Mexico because I heard so many stories about people getting ransomed and murdered and killed. And it's seeing the news articles of these things happening. Okay, where are these things happening in Bhutan? Is Bhutan a dangerous place like Tijuana?
If you disagree with the government, it is. But I've been to Tijuana several times.
Statistical murder rate. I'm talking. If you go down the list of the countries that have the absolute highest crime, murder, all that sort of stuff, you're saying Bhutan is at the top of that list? Can you give me that information?
I'm saying that the people in Bhutan are living in poverty. Yes. And they're
living in poverty, but I'm talking about actual. I'm not talking about just poverty. I'm talking poverty on top of crime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Let's look at the top 10 poorest countries in the world. Can you name the top 10 poorest countries in the world? Can you list them off?
Okay. All right. Let me look into this. I might not be pronouncing some of these names right. Burundi, Burundi.
Yep.
Somalia.
Yep.
Mozambique.
Yep.
Madagascar, Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, Central African Republic, Liberia, Niger, and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yes. What nation? The reason
of these nations is Buddhist again?
The reason none of these are Buddhist, but I don't believe in these numbers.
So you concur that the poorest nations in the world are not Buddhist, right?
No, they fall. Did I say that they were the poorest? Actually, when I gave you my chart, they were in the middle.
Yeah, so if some of these are Christian nations or whatever the case in there, like Somalia, well, maybe not Somalia, but there are Christian nations on this list.
And every one of those countries that you just named, Burundi, Somalia, Mozambique, when you look at all of these nations, Christians are actually persecuted in all these nations. But here's the problem with the nations that you just named, not one of them was North Korea. No, because that means that I don't know where that list comes from, but it's when you're looking at GDP or violence, that's going to be skewed because not a lot of these authoritarian nations give out the correct numbers. And so when you try to get information, for instance, from Bhutan, we didn't even know what the population from Bhutan was until only a few decades ago. Why? Because they lied. They lied about who they were and what they were.
We don't really know what we don't know. So let's just talk about what we do know. If we look out, think about it. If you're saying that Christianity is the reason why a country is prosperous, they're doing well, or whatever the case is, it doesn't make any sense that you would look at the top, poorest countries in the world and realize that quite a few of them on this list are Christian, like Liberia. Liberia is an extremely poor country.
Yeah, but Christians are persecuted. When I look at Madagascar, Sierra Leone, Mozambique, I think you said, and Burundi, those nations, Christians are persecuted. I don't know what the situation is in Liberia and Niger because I haven't worked with people there in those nations.
Even in Japan, in their history, they had conflicts with Christians. They were murdering them. They were executing them. They had to publicly admit that they weren't Christian, or else they would execute them.
They did, absolutely. But now that's not the case. That hasn't been the case for
Christians. Yet Japan is doing very well.
That has not been the case for generations.
Yes, it has not been it has not been the case for generations. So you're basically saying that any country where a Christian is persecuted.
Yes. Yeah, because
cannot do well and be prosperous. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am saying.
What percentage are Christians? Let's look at Liberia, for example. They're a Christian nation. They're like 80-90% Christian. How much Christian persecution do you think is happening in a country that is 95% Christian? Like how many of these people are being prosecuted?
Well, in the same way that when you look at Catholic countries, Protestants are often persecuted, or people that don't.
A country that is 95% Catholic, Christian, the Christians are underneath attack from who?
There are Christians, even within Christianity, that will persecute Christians that don't believe in the way that they believe. There is a freedom.
That happens here in the United States?
I do believe that it happens in the United States.
So why are we prosperous then?
Do you think America's prosperous?
Not one Christian has been persecuted here in the United States, and you said is that the reason?
Whoa, what? You don't think one Christian has been persecuted in the United States?
That's what I'm trying to tell you. You said that those countries are not doing well because there is persecution of Christians going on in those countries. That doesn't make sense when America is doing well and Christians are persecuted here.
Okay, yeah, Christians are persecuted in the U.S. But if you see the U.S. continues to drop. Its economy continues to drop. Its influence continues to drop. There's a lot of challenges with America right now, especially when it comes to like human rights and freedoms.
Okay, again, you're just goalpost shifting here, Eugene. I'm talking about the wealth of a nation. All right? You said that the reason why these countries are poor is because Christians are being persecuted. I would be willing to wager that Christians are probably persecuted in every country, probably in the world, at least one person.
You don't agree. You don't agree. That's fine. So now the question is, what makes...
No, it's not about agreeing.
No, it absolutely
is. I'm saying you specifically just said that those countries are not prosperous because there is some small faction of people, of non-Christians that are attacking the Christians, and that's why the country is not successful. Like, I want to look up and I want to see what percentage of Ethiopia is actually considered to be Christian, you know?
Well, Addis Ababa population is going to be pretty high, and that's where you're going to have the population of a lot of your Christians. I've been up into the northern part of Ethiopia. I've worked with the persecuted Christians, and I've also worked with the Christians that had to hide in the caves in northern Ethiopia because of the attacks of Muslims that have come down into the area where they had to live on cliffs that couldn't be climbed except for ropes that they would let down.
Yeah, but I mean, realistically speaking, didn't Christians kill a lot of people and destroyed a lot of indigenous nations and did a lot of stuff like that? I mean, so couldn't you say that maybe, we're reaping what we sowed?
If it was Christianity, when did Christians do that?
We persecuted other people in our history. Isn't that not true?
Yes, we have. And the difference is that we acknowledge it.
What the Bible says, you reap what you sow. So if Christians are actually being attacked now, wouldn't that be something that maybe you could say is something that they brought on themselves, maybe?
If you follow the footsteps of Christ, who was persecuted, yes, it's something that we bring on ourselves.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be...
If we follow the footsteps of Christ.
I'm saying you have invented your own belief system. You have not. This is not Christian teachings. That I've never heard any priest, any monk, any Christian nun, anybody say, hey, if you practice Christianity 2-3 generations down the line, you guys are going to be prosperous. You're going to be doing well. This is your own invented belief system. It's not Christianity.
No, it's if we see the results of it every single time, we see generations that are
that's not true,
living differently.
Ethiopia is one of the first Christian nations in the entire world, and they're living in poverty. And then your answer to that is, well, they're being persecuted. Christians are being persecuted here in America. Why are we
wait a minute. You have to know the history of Ethiopia. And if you look at, for instance, one of the earliest Christian nations was Turkey. If we look at one of the earliest Christian nations, we have Syria. Those nations became Muslim nations because of Muslim attacks. The entire northern part of Africa used to be Christian. Ethiopia had to fight through that. They had to struggle through that. They've struggled through that. I mean, I just wrote the book Shackled about Miriam. Miriam's mother had to flee as an Orthodox Christian from Ethiopia to Sudan as a refugee because she was being attacked by Muslims. So, I mean, to look at, this nation as it's always been Christian, it's only been Christian, is not an accurate picture of Ethiopia. And if you don't believe that, that's fine. This is not salvation essential. This will not get you into heaven. This is not anything. All of the books that I teach are about, or all the books that I write about teach about sacrifice and following in the footsteps of Christ. And if you follow in the footsteps of Christ, you will be persecuted. That is a promise. That's the forgotten promise of Jesus, is that Christians will be persecuted, bar none. But if you don't believe that Protestant nations have experienced generations of blessings because of them following after Christ, then what is the factor that makes nations wealthy and nations that are poor?
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, there are many contributing factors to why a nation is doing better than others. But I have never heard any economist specifically cite religion as the reason why a specific nation is doing good.
No, I've never heard any economist ever say that ever.
Like I said, if we go down the list of the world's poorest countries in the world, you will see that most of them are Christian. Most of them are Christian or Muslim countries, most of them. And even if you, like you said, you look at Israel, Israel is doing very well. They don't believe in Jesus. They think that he's a fraud. Why would God bless people who specifically says that Jesus is a false prophet, and God still continues to bless them?
We see a Christian Judaic background.
My question is, these people have denounced and have refused our Messiah for thousands of years. And look at the state of Israel. It is doing extremely well. What you're saying is true. If God is out there smiting people who are not, and the thing is, these people they have been against these people for a long time. You know what I mean? Like I said, I think you're trying to turn a correlation into a causation, and you don't have any empirical evidence to prove that.
Except for all the nations that you can point to in the world. And it comes back to the idea that I said about those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed.
There's persecution of Christians happening here. Why are we like Ethiopia?
If you look at all the nations where refugees go to, so when refugees come out, where do they go to? They don't go to the Buddhist nations. They don't go to the Muslim nations. They don't go to the Hindu nations. When refugees come out, where do they go? They go to the Protestant Christian nations.
Your goalpost shifting, Eugene. I'm asking specifically for the wealth of these countries. You're talking about refugees. You keep changing the subject.
No, I don't. You think refugees are going to poor nations?
Causation of this wealth in this country is specifically
you are not getting your way here, and it's making you upset. That's very clear. I keep pointing out information. I keep trying to share examples, and you don't accept any of them. What you do is you try to find these little caveats, and then you try to say, well, this doesn't work.
First, you keep narrowing it down. Christian nations. Never mind. They have to be Protestant nations. Never mind. They can't have any persecutions in their nation. And
I love how the beginning of this whole conversation, what did I say? We have a pyramid. We have a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, I said very clearly, was the Protestant nation. So if we look at the top of the pyramid, we have a Protestant nation, right? The Protestant Judaic nation. That's exactly what I said, where we have Israel and the Protestant nations at the top. That's exactly what I said. The next level down, not as wealthy, but we still see benefits. That is the Catholic nations. And then if we go the next level down, then we see the Hindu and Buddhist nations. The next level down, where the misery index starts to go up a little bit, is the Muslim nations. And at the very bottom, where the misery index is the highest, is the atheist nations. That's what I said.
Okay, fair enough. I do think that there is a lot of misery in places like China, where atheism is really a hugely practiced religion, and even then, China is doing remarkably well. And they obviously they persecute everybody in China, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists. It doesn't matter what you're doing, and they're the second richest country in the whole world.
No, they're not.
And they're up there. Where is China as far as like GDP?
They're either number one or number two.
Isn't that what I just said?
Yeah, you said they're the richest country in the world, and it's not true.
I know they're one of the richest countries countries in the world. That's what I said.
Okay, well, if you're basing it off of GDP, which is what this whole argument has been about, then you're going to find nations at the top and nations at the bottom that don't actually belong there. China's one of those ones that show very high GDP, but is an extremely poor nation. Depends on where you're at. I mean, you can be in Beijing, but most of China is extremely dirt poor. One of the things that I do is humanitarian projects. We're talking about individuals that live far below the United Nations poverty level of $1 a day. It's the wealth that they are able to bring in and show on their GDP isn't even real. It's fake. I can point to a lot of economic factors that just aren't true on that, like I can with other nations if I was to sit down and decipher or take apart any other argument of saying, okay, well, this nation is the poorest and these nations are the wealthiest. When I'm talking about wealth, I'm talking about a lot more than just GDP. And one of the reasons why I talked about refugees and where they go is because their destinations are usually based on where they feel like they will have the most freedom and they will have the most economic promises where they can go and do something for themselves. And when I was talking about the very top of the pyramid, when I started off talking about the Protestant work ethic study by Yale University, which it was done in 2017 or 2018, it goes back to this point, which I will say again. Whoever blesses Israel will be blessed, and whoever curses Israel will be cursed. And that's where we see a big difference. There are certain countries that really clamp down.
I mean, is Ethiopia and Libya really cursing Israel like that?
Most Ethiopians consider themselves Jewish.
Yeah, right. So why would they be cursing Israel?
They don't curse Israel.
So why are they poor then?
Why do you keep saying that they're poor?
Because they're one of the poorest countries in the world.
GDP-wise, maybe, but I mean, anybody that's been to Addis Ababa would not say that.
GDP-wise, I'm talking about what each person is living off of. That's what I'm not going off GDP. I'm going off what the average person is making a year.
Okay, well, I've spent quite a bit of time in Ethiopia.
One of the poorest in the entire world.
If I fly from New York City to Addis Ababa, it feels pretty poor. If I go from Sudan or Somalia back into Addis Ababa, it feels like I'm in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. When you look at their surroundings, they're actually doing pretty well. And Addis Ababa continues to build. Their economy continues to grow. Ethiopia is a shining star in Africa, and I actually love being there. I love what's actually taking place with them, and I would consider them to be a part of that same category of being a blessing, and the nations being blessed because they continue to grow in Christianity.
Okay, I mean, you know, and like I said, these things could very well be true. Everything you're saying could be factually true. I want to reiterate that I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that you can't prove it.
Except for what I see, and that's the only thing that I've been sharing is about what I see.
Data is not empirical data. You cannot possibly sit there. I mean, take for instance, I'm black. I grew up here in the United States. You know how much racism I have experienced here in the United States being a black man? Imagine me using my personal life experiences and using that to be like, oh yeah, all white people are racist. That would not be accurate. That's my personal experience. So you're trying to use anecdotal data in place of empirical data? That doesn't...
my point...
You can observe something. I'm not saying that you can't.
Yep.
But the actual cost of what the people are making, what they're living off of per day in Ethiopia is one of the top, I think, 15 or 20 poorest countries in the entire world.
How do you measure spiritual development? How do you measure?
No. Every time we start really digging into these things, you start goalpost shifting into something else.
No.
I want to stay on the topic.
And I'm on the topic. And you said there's no empirical evidence. The empirical evidence is...
I don't want to talk about anything else.
The empirical evidence that I've shared is the nations that have become Protestant nations that continue to be a shining light as long as they continue to give freedom to believers. The moment they begin to persecute Christians, we see a complete change. I see it every single time. We can look at the rise and fall of nations based on whether Christians are being persecuted or not. When we see revival break out or churches shutting down, there's a direct connection that we've seen throughout history. You can believe it or you don't have to believe it. It's not a problem.
Can you point me to those resources, please, so I can read that information?
I would point you first to the very first study that I talked about, which is the Yale University study on the Protestant work ethic.
Well, the Protestant work ethic doesn't come from the Bible. It's their own personal.
You just asked me to point you to a study, and I just, with empirical data, that's data that's been studied based on the very thing that I said.
You couldn't answer my question. Like I told you, the Seventh-day Adventists, they're outliving everybody. It's not because they're following something out the Bible. They have created their own diet. You know that a large portion of the Seventh-day Adventists, they are pescatarians, vegetarians, and vegans. Where in the Bible is it recommending anybody to eat any of these types of diets? It's not based on scripture. They've been successful at outliving everybody, but this is their own personal system or protocols that they created that is only to their religion, that is only to their denomination, should I say. Just like the Protestant work ethic, it is something that they created as Protestants. It's not something that Jesus taught them how to do.
It is a byproduct of following the gospel. And so let's leave it there. We're not getting anywhere.
Why doesn't every Christian nation have that?
No, every Christian nation does not have that, but
exactly.
It has been.
It is a product of the Protestants who created those protocols. It's not something that is universal.
It is absolutely universal. The beautiful thing about it, the beautiful thing about what I just said,
just like the diet of the Seventh-day Adventists, it's not a universal.
The beautiful thing that I just said, I'm just going to put you on mute for a second, is that I can look at the examples in Africa, I can look at the examples in Europe, I can look at the examples in Asia, I can look at the examples in America. It goes across the board where we can see people that have been blessed, and it's not about, we see that it's not about political systems, it's not about economic systems, because we can see whether if we're looking at democracy, we can find democracy in Iran. If we're looking at free markets, we can find free markets in nations that are not doing very well. It's that I believe, and when we look at the data and when we look at the nations, we see again and again that those that choose to follow the Lord actually have a benefit that is residual, that impacts the generations. It's not just the God of Abraham, but it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And
okay, I mean, like I said, you're showing correlations, but you have not shown me an exact causation.
Okay, I believe that I have. You believe that I have not. That's fine.
No. It's not about belief. It's not about belief. It's what you're talking about. There is a correlation between these Protestant work ethics and their wealth. I get that. I see that there is a correlation here. I'm not saying that, but can you prove empirically that correlation is the causation?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
When we look at the Bible, again and again, generations rise and fall when they abandon God or they accept God. The Bible points that out. And if you want to measure whether a nation exists or doesn't exist anymore, we can see their rise and fall empirically. That can be witnessed, it can be logged, it's a part of history.
And so what about Israel? Like, why is Israel doing so good even though they reject Jesus?
That's one of the things that I believe that they are our big brother in the faith. And when I first started off, I said that we have the Christian Judaic countries at the top, the Protestant nations, and the Jews at the top. That's why I said...
But these people don't believe in Jesus. They reject him. So why would God continue to bless people that reject God? They literally are rejecting Jesus.
They are.
So why would God bless them?
Because God has somehow made them our older brother. And the word that you and I have, the Bible that we have...
Where in Scripture, again, is this coming from?
When we look at the entire Bible, what we see is that the Bible itself came from the sacrifice of a called people, that God called out the nation from Abraham.
I want to know, where in the Bible does it say that people who don't believe in Jesus are our big brothers? I have never heard a Christian say that.
No, I said the Jews are our big brothers.
That's what I said that incorrectly. I have never heard a Christian say that the Jews are our big brothers. You are literally the first person I've ever heard say that.
It's a term. Well, that's because I spend quite a bit of time with a good friend of mine who's named Rabbi Miles Weiss. And he really has opened up a lot of my understanding about where Christians are to bless the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. The idea that is pointed out by Paul himself when he writes his letter to the church in Rome, saying that salvation belongs to everyone that believes, to the Jew first and then also to the Greek. This idea that we first take the gospel to the Jews, and also that this is the people.
Refused it.
Yeah, but this is the people group that have suffered so much to bring us the Word of God. And the Word of God isn't just the New Testament, it's both of them.
So you're saying that economically speaking, people who have rejected our religion it seems like whenever, this is the thing, if you're going to tell something or you're going to specifically bring up a point, if there are loopholes and holes in your argument, and then you have to invent a whole other argument to support that, it's like, Japan is the exception, Ethiopia, their history, and Jew, but there's always an excuse, like you're always coming up with some other reason as to why this nation is not doing well or they are doing well. It's very clear to anybody that Jews do not really believe in Jesus. They are not a Christian nation. They have rejected our Messiah, and yet you said because they suffered that God is blessing them. Everybody around the world has suffered, boss.
Not for God.
Show me a nation.
Not for God. And when I started off, I said it very clearly that at the top of the pinnacle we have the Protestant nations and the Jewish nation. There's only one Jewish nation. And
yes, but they have rejected our faith. So why is God continuing to bless them? Because they suffered? Lots of people suffered around the world. Boss, why isn't God continuing to bless them? Because they suffered.
Because in the Word, God says that He has chosen His people, and that they have become His chosen people. And even though they are stiff-necked, God still loves them and requires that we also love them and we bless them. There is a blessing in following the teachings, even of the Old Testament. I know that there are.
The Ethiopians said that they're the Jews. Why isn't God blessing Ethiopia?
I don't understand why you keep feeling that Ethiopia is just this huge, horrible place to go to. I love Ethiopia.
I never said that. I'm talking about the poverty levels around the world. You can look this up. People who live in Ethiopia are considered to be one of the poorest people. That they're on that list. And I'm not talking about GDP. I'm talking about what the average person is making a year versus their cost of living in that specific area. All right? That's what I'm talking about. Every nation in the entire world has suffered at some point. Not just the Jewish nation. Every single nation in this world has suffered in some way. So it doesn't, like I said, you said that these people are God's chosen people, but they have rejected God's teaching. So even if they're God's people,
well, you may not like it. You may not like it. You may not like that God has chosen.
If you read the Bible, every time the Jewish nation turned away from God, He straight up punishes them. Yeah. Why aren't they being punished now?
There are certain rules, and this is why at the very beginning I said that if you look at the top of the pinnacle of the nations that are the most productive, and by the way, I didn't say wealthy just as in GDP. I didn't even mention GDP. I said that nations that have...
I didn't mention GDP either. I'm mentioning as far as like how much the average person makes, as far as like where they're lolocated on the poverty line and all that.
Access to education. When we look at quality of life in Ethiopia is much higher than all their neighbors. When we look at the quality of life in Israel, it's much higher than all of their neighbors. Israel is a nation that has been blessed by God. The Jewish people have been blessed by God, and God said that He would use the Gentiles to provoke to jealousy His people to turn to Him in the last days. When we continue to bless them and pray for them, it is something that Jesus did, and it's something that we do in following after Him. The Old Testament is the same God of the New Testament. That He is the God of yesterday, today, and forever. They adhere to the Old Testament, and the Torah. They cling to it and they follow the rules. And there are many things within that teaching of the Old Testament that bless the nations, that bless people. Even if you don't follow Christ, if you just follow the Bible and bless His people, there is a residual effect that people receive from that.
You just said that without Christ, there's no way to get to God. So how are they still able to tap into? So you are essentially saying that there is a way that they can access God without going through Christ?
I didn't say they can get to heaven.
No, I'm talking about they can elicit blessings from God without going through Jesus, because it says that the only access that we have to God is through Christ.
For salvation.
Is there another way to access God's blessings without going through Christ?
Nope, there's for salvation. So when it comes to salvation, it's only through Christ.
I'm not talking about salvation. That you said Jesus is the truth, the light, and the way. The only way to the Father is through me. He never adds the caveat salvation. He just says the only access to God is through me. How do Jewish people still have access to God without Jesus? There's another way to access God without Jesus?
There is no way to access God without Jesus.
So how are they receiving these blessings?
They continue to follow His law. They continue to follow, and they are the ones that...
The laws are not going to really, they're not going to save you in any sort of that sort of way. It's not going to connect you to God because you're following laws. You got to go through Jesus. Following laws isn't going to connect you to God.
Yeah, it's not going to benefit them spiritually at all. But there are spiritual laws. There are things that you do in the Old Testament that just naturally benefit nations. So, for instance, don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't covet. These things following.
Buddhism has all these teachings too. Where does Buddhism teach that you can take somebody's wife or steal or lie or any of that sort of stuff?
There is a persecution that takes place. There is a denial of the God of the Bible. There is a persecution for those that print.
They denied Jesus. The Jews denied Jesus outright.
They did. But this is also our history.
As in today.
Yeah, and this is the history of Christianity. They are where we come from. And we continue to bless them, and we continue to pray for them, and we continue to believe in their salvation, that God has a timing for the Jewish people.
Okay, I mean, I'm willing to accept that, but like I said, these people have rejected our Messiah and are still receiving blessings from God. I don't even understand how that's even working. Because every time in the Bible that the Jews turn away from God, He crushes them.
He does.
They're crushed.
We do. And this is the rise and the fall of nations.
Why aren't they crushed? Like why are they doing so well? Who's blessing them? If it's not God who's blessing them, because obviously they have no access to God because they don't have Christ. So because the only way to access God is through Christ, so they have no access to God, and yet God is still continuing to bless them. Like for what reason?
There is a blessing that comes from the generations, and when we look at the Jewish people, you and I owe so much to them.
What verse is this from the Bible again?
You mean where were the Jews called by God? Where does it say?
I'm saying where does it say that they're going to continue to be blessed even though they reject the Messiah because they're God's people? Like where does the Bible say that?
The Bible just says that whoever blesses Israel will be blessed, and who curses Israel will be cursed. This is a law. This is a spiritual law. So my job is not to judge.
My question is that
Israel.
Let's say in Mexico, for instance, you really think that they're over there cursing Israel like that? Why are they so poor?
Do I believe that can you say it again?
Like, let's say you go to a poor country like Brazil or Mexico or something. They're doing very, very bad over there. Violence is crazy. They're super poor over there. That's because they don't like Israel. Like, where'd you get that from?
First of all, I would not agree that Brazil is super poor and doing really bad.
But they're definitely not doing very well.
For a Catholic country, they are doing pretty well. I mean, one of the funnest cities in South America to visit is Rio de Janeiro. We actually have an office.
But if you leave the city, Rio de Janeiro has one of the highest crime rates in the entire world. It's considered to be like what? Isn't it like the murder capital of the world or like something like that? It's really violent over there.
Yeah, you could. But I mean, if you travel there, a lot of the things that you read in the news or see in the news isn't always true. You would think that Washington, D.C. is one of the most dangerous places in the world, but I often go there and spend time in the capital city. I would not agree that Brazil is one of the poorest nations in the world.
No. I'm not saying that they're one of the poorest nations in the world. I wouldn't agree with that either. And then, but they're definitely not doing as well as a lot of the other like G7 nations and things like that. They're not on that list.
No, but they also come lower. So when I gave the brackets, I said that the Catholic nations come a little bit lower, that you actually drop down. We have now come up to the 2-hour mark. I have loved this conversation. I love the debate. I think that you've given me some things to think about. I think that our audience has a real challenge to some of the things that I've said. Now they can kind of look up what they believe or what they don't believe, what they agree with, what they don't agree with. Anyway, you've stayed on. You haven't got angry and hung up. No. I'm not. And the thing is, I also, before we get off, I want to state again that I'm not saying you're wrong. I want to make that very clear. I'm not saying that you are wrong and that everything you said is wrong. I'm just saying that you cannot point to any specific book or any specific economist that will agree with what it is that you're saying. Like anybody that is an expert in economics would not sit down and agree with you and say, yes, if it's because they're Christian and it's because this country doesn't persecute Christians is why they're doing good. I don't think any economist that has even a PhD in this stuff would agree with you. It's your own personal belief system, and that's fine. But it's not something that you can empirically prove. You make correlations, and there are decent correlations. There are exceptions in some areas, but I don't think anybody who is an expert in this field would sit down with you and agree with you and say, yes, the reason why these nations are poor is because they persecute Christians. Yeah, I think that you're right. I think that I completely
empirically proven truth. It's just more like your own personal belief system, and I'm more than okay with that.
Yeah, I completely agree that there are not many economists that would agree with me, and that's why our world continues to deteriorate.
You are not a specialist in this field. You're not a specialist in economics. You know what I mean? Like, if we go to the people who specialize in economics, I can almost 100% guarantee you with certainty that none of them is going to cite the fact that they don't persecute Christians as the reason why the nations is doing good. There's no sign, there's no evidence to point to that.
I would agree.
No university is teaching that, nothing.
I would agree. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons why when we turn to our economists to find out how to fix broken nations, that's why they can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, that could, again, this is just, I mean, I want to separate out between your personal beliefs and what is empirically proven and known. That you don't really know for a fact if that's true or not.
But I see it work over and over again. It's one of the reasons why I've given my life to make sure that we preach the good news of Jesus Christ into some of the darkest regions of the world, because it changes a person's life. It changes the family's life. It changes their children's life and their children's for generations, and it impacts societies. My background is in the U.S. military.
I 100% believe that teaching people about Jesus and teaching people about religion or just Christianity in general is going to benefit those people. There is absolutely no argument that you're getting from me on that.
So we can leave it there.
The economic side of it is something that I'm kind of like, there's no expert. Like if I were talking to you about medical stuff and you're saying, hey, if you're a Christian, you're going to have better health. And then you're like, oh, look at all these Christians that I know that live a long life that I've met. And then I go and talk to a doctor and I'm like, so does religion have anything to do with living long? He's going to tell me no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. You see what I'm saying? That the people who are experts in this field, and you claim that the reason why that they can't repair economies is because they're not able to identify that religion is the cause of it. Again, this is your own belief system. This is not something from the Bible. This is not something Jesus taught. If anything, Jesus specifically said that people who are wealthy would have a hard time actually getting into heaven. He said that.
He did. I from the very beginning. Let's make sure that we maintain exactly what I said.
Because maybe the nations with the wealthy, maybe that's where all the people are going to hell.
Yep.
Because Jesus made it quite clear that the people who are wealthy, they have a much harder time getting into heaven. He said it's easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than it is to get a wealthy man into heaven. Maybe that's the same thing with a wealthy nation, because you can maybe say that Jesus did not speak very highly on wealth at all. He never used that as a correlation for a person living a virtuous life or them being connected with God. I want to just make it clear that this is not a teaching from Jesus, it's a teaching from you. That's what I want to make that clear.
Okay, and what I want to make clear, is that this is not a teaching from me. This is, just going to mute you again because you, for some reason, I love doing this debate, but you're a bit of a conversational bully. And when it's my turn to talk, I try to be respectful when you're speaking, but you don't, I don't think you recognize that, because the moment I start to talk, you flare up. Obviously, there are certain things that I say that don't sit well with you, so you try to interrupt, you try to speak over, you try to dominate, and we've been about 2 hours now of domination here, and I've been trying to allow you to put out all of your arguments, and you've made very valid arguments, and I've loved having this conversation. But let's make sure that we don't change the words here. Let's make sure that we don't say that you are teaching that if you follow Christ, you'll be wealthy. That is not, and I said that from the very beginning, that is not what I have ever said. That's not anything that I believe. What I said was we can see nations benefit when they turn to Christ. We can see that there's a difference between Protestant nations and those that live in darkness. That is something that I continue to see over and over again. You say correlation. That's basically how studies are done. That's how people do observations, and then they log in that information from observations. You say that there's not one university that teaches that. I would agree. There's not one economist that believes that. I would agree. That's one of the reasons why when we do nation building through United Nation groups inside of universities, they try to come up with study after study, information after information, laying out the roadmap to help nations build up. And every time it seems to fall apart. Why? Because I believe the cornerstone for healthy societies is Jesus Christ. And when we neglect him, when we neglect the word, or when we persecute his people, like in an instance in Japan, where people give freedom to believers, they give freedom to Christians, they actually benefit as a society. Inside of China, when we saw Christians not being persecuted, we saw the nation of China growing. 2019, persecution increased. We saw the nation coming back down. Do you have to believe that? No, you don't. I have said that from the very beginning. That is not a salvation essential. That is something that I have seen from the beginning of working in these different nations. Unlike you, I spend a lot of time in these different nations. I don't just read the GDP or see what the income is for the individuals and say, oh, well, they're not having it very good there. Ethiopia shows up on the internet as a place that they have low income, therefore they must be poor. Or if I look at Brazil, they have low income, therefore they must be poor. I have traveled to North Korea, who's not on that top list of the 10 poorest nations in the world. I've spent time in Sudan, which is not on the top 10 list of the most poorest nations in the world. I've spent time in Iraq and Syria, that's not on the top 10 list of the most poor nations in the world. I've been in these areas and I've seen the difference of what the gospel does and what the gospel doesn't when it's present, and what happens when a government adopts as their main focus to persecute Christians. There is a change, and I gave that change as an example with the nation of Germany when it was divided in two, East and West Germany. I also gave the example of North and South Korea. We can look at Russia pre-communism, Russia post-communism, when there was persecution against the Christians. You don't have to believe that. You can say that that's my own belief. I'm totally fine with that. You can also believe that that's not what the Bible says. I'm totally fine with that. But to say that I am saying that there is a wealth of treasure waiting for those, or riches waiting for those that accept Christ, that is something I've never said. In fact, one of the biggest messages that I've ever preached or pushed is the forgotten promise of Jesus, whereas if you follow Christ, you will see persecution. It's been a great 2 hours. I just wanted to end with that note. I know that this has been a really long conversation. I am super appreciative that you answered the phone. I'm super appreciative that we were able to have the conversation. I'm sad that we had to cut off your audio there towards the end just because I really did wait for opportunities to speak. But as soon as I spoke, there were times where I'm just not able to get in a word edgewise because there was this bullying taking place that kept coming back and kept pushing in without allowing me to speak or share. And when I was done with my thoughts, I stopped, I paused, I allowed you to speak so that you could have time. I think in this recording, in this 2 hours, more than half of it was given to you. And I think that you brought up some really good points, some really valid points. And I want to thank you, for those of you that are listeners for Back to Jerusalem, for joining us for this Back to Jerusalem podcast. This has been one of those things that I think is absolutely essential for the Christian body. This is absolutely essential for our conversation. I know that it's not easy to talk with people that you don't agree with, but that is imperative that we do that. It's also imperative that we don't always think that we're right. The great thing about talking to other brothers and sisters is that we might be wrong, and other individuals can show us the way. Other individuals can chip away at the part of our belief system that may not be correct. And when we believe things that are not in the Bible, we need to discuss with others and be willing to admit that, okay, that is not in the Bible. You're right. That is something that I believe in, but I don't say that it's salvation essential or something that Jesus taught. It is really important that we open ourselves up to criticism. It is very important that we open ourselves up to allow people to challenge us, especially when they do it with good intentions, especially when they do it as a Christian brother or Christian believer. This is very important. I'm very happy that we were able to have this brother on. I actually didn't know he was a Christian. I was told that he was a Tibetan Buddhist. I thought that we were going to talk about Buddhism. So I was really happy that we were going to discuss Buddhism, but instead we talked about the belief that whether God can bless generations or not bless generations, whether he can bless the nations or not bless the nations, whether there's any correlation or connection or even empirical evidence to point to God being the major factor that blesses the nations. It's really good that we open ourselves up and we have these kind of conversations, and I'm thankful for it. And I'm thankful that you guys, for those of you that were able to stay with us for this long, were able to join together with us. I want to thank you for joining us for this Back to Jerusalem podcast. Again, I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of sunny Sweden. God bless.